Hi, my name is Dana. Today, I wanted to share my biggest secret, my plastic surgery. I know what you're thinking. What kind of teenager gets plastic surgery? Well, you'd be surprised. These days, with everyone wanting to fit in or look like the next Kardashian, plastic surgery is more common than ever, even in someone as young as me. I was 18 when I got my surgery. So, before you judge me, hear my story and tell me what you would have done in my situation. I've always been the chubby girl in my class. Growing up, I was bullied so much for my weight that it became the thing I thought about the most. I tried absolutely everything I could. I went on diet after diet growing up, and nothing seemed to help me. I tried absolutely everything I could. I spent all my allowance on these detox diet teas I found on Instagram too, but nothing seemed to work. Eventually, my mom took me to the doctors, and I found out that I had a medical problem. The doctor called it an underactive thyroid, but basically, it just meant my hormones were unbalanced, and my metabolism was super slow, so I kept gaining weight. The doctor gave me some medicine and said things should get better after that. I was really happy for the first time in a long time that day. But that all changed when I first started high school. I started to get interested in boys, but I didn't have any experience dealing with them. So I asked my best friend Annie about it, and the reaction I got was awful. I expected her to help me, or give me advice, and I guess she did, but it was useless. Annie told me I'd never get a boyfriend with the way I looked. She told me that I was too fat for any guy to be interested in. I tried to stay strong, but after we spoke, I cried and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. I felt like my whole life revolved around my weight, and because I couldn't do anything about it, my whole life was ruined. But the doctor had said I might lose some weight now that I was on medication. I just had to hold on and hope for the best. Things did get better, too. I met a new friend in my trigonometry class named Lucas. He was super nice to me, and I felt like for the first time in a long time that someone looked past my appearance and saw the real me. We became friends and hung out a lot after school. We both liked playing games and spent a lot of afternoons playing on his Xbox at his house. After a few months, I realized that I had a crush on Lucas, but I was scared. He was slim, tall, and cute, and I was a fat, disgusting mess. I went back to Annie to ask her what I should do about it, but she gave me pretty much the same answer as before. Lucas will never like you the way you are now. You need to lose weight. I was sick of her always putting me down about my weight, so I stopped talking to her after that. But I couldn't shake what she'd said. I didn't believe Lucas would like me the way I looked, so I never told him about my crush. I didn't want to get hurt, or lose a great friend. Over the course of freshman year, I still didn't lose any weight, so I started considering something I'd thought about for years now: plastic surgery. My great-aunt had died a few months back and left me a lot of money. I was going to save it for college, but maybe this was a better use for it. I spoke to my mom and dad about it at first. They were both against the idea. They didn't think I needed it. But as I explained how I felt and how I hated the way I looked, my mom came around. My dad still didn't like the idea. He told me that I was beautiful just the way I was, and I didn't need to change for anyone. But I explained that I didn't want to change for anyone else. I wanted this for myself. In the end, my mom convinced my dad to let me do it. She said she thought it would help my self-esteem, and we'd exhausted all other options. We spoke to my doctor, and while he didn't want me to do it, he did agree that liposuction may have some health benefits. I was so excited, and my dad finally seemed to get on board. So, that summer, I did it. I had 2 types of surgery. I got the lipo to get rid of fat around different parts of my body, and I got something called a rhinoplasty, which actually has nothing to do with rhinos. It's an operation to change the shape of my nose, which was something else I'd been unhappy with before. It wasn't a big change. They just smoothed out a little bump and made it straighter. I figured why not if I was already getting something else done. After a few weeks of recovery, I finally looked in the mirror. And, wow, I was shocked by how much I had changed. I still looked like me, of course, but just the thinner version I'd always seen in my dreams. My nose was just the tiniest bit straighter, too. I didn't think anyone would notice that, in comparison with my dramatic weight loss. In celebration, my mom took me on a big shopping trip to buy all new clothes that fit the new me. I was so excited to go back to school and show them off, but the most important thing was that I didn't want anyone to know about the surgery. I thought that people would judge me or tease me about it, so my mom and I agreed to tell people I went on a new diet over the summer. When the time came to go back to school, I was nervous. As I expected, everyone was shocked when I walked through the halls. People stared, and their mouths were gaping open. People were whispering and pointing at me. It was a little uncomfortable, but I had known it would happen, so I held my head high. Whenever anyone asked, I told them about the diet. Everyone believed it. I'd never been so happy. Then something else happened that totally surprised me. The hottest guy in school, Danny, asked me out. I couldn't believe it. He'd never taken an interest in me before, and now I had a super hot boyfriend. My life had changed so much in just a few months. Everything was amazing. Except for one thing. Lucas and I fought. He saw me hanging around with Danny and told me it was a bad idea, that he was just using me. I couldn't believe after all this time, Lucas wouldn't support me. I thought we were close, but it turns out he was just another Annie who always wanted to put me down. I felt so betrayed. I told Lucas to leave me alone and stop getting involved in my life. But then something I never expected happened. I turned up at school the next day, and there were pictures of my face everywhere. They were stuck to everybody's lockers. I rushed over to tear one down and look at it, and I gasped. It was 2 pictures of me side by side, with the words before and after. They'd circled my nose and pointed out the change I'd made. I couldn't believe it. Tears welled in my eyes, and I ran around the halls tearing down as many posters as I could. I didn't want anybody to see these, but there was no point. When I sat down in the toilet cubicle to cry, I checked my phone and saw the same picture on my Facebook. People were sharing it with the hashtag Dana had plastic surgery. I felt sick. I couldn't face class. I couldn't face school. Not after this. But I knew the rumors would just get worse if I didn't. So I went to first period, and I tried to ignore the whispers and the laughing. As if matters couldn't get any worse, Danny broke up with me. He said that he didn't want a fake girlfriend, and I had a bad reputation now. I was devastated. I thought he really liked me, but he was just another person who let me down when I needed them the most. The pictures and rumors had ruined my life. I wanted to find out who had started it all, so I began asking around, and eventually, the answers all led to one person.
Hi everybody, my name is Cheryl, and my story is a super weird one. Before we start, I gotta ask, have any of you ever felt like the odd one out in your family? Maybe everyone else likes soccer and you can't stand it? Or maybe they all have dark hair and yours is blonde? Well, if you understand what that's like, imagine it times 1,000,000, and that's how I feel in my family. Hear me out, and you'll see why. I was born into a pretty normal family. Well, as normal as anyone can be. My mom and dad were teachers, and my older sisters were just as annoying and bratty as everyone else's. We all loved each other, spent time together, and our lives were great. The only family relative I failed to get along with was my cousin Jenna. I always assumed she was jealous of me because she wanted sisters, because she was an only child, and she was jealous that I had 2 when she had none. Besides Jenna, however, I thought our lives would always be perfect and full of happiness, but I was wrong. When I was 13, my dad died unexpectedly of a heart attack, and obviously we were all devastated. None of us knew how we were going to move on with our lives after losing such a huge part of our world. My mom fell into a kind of rut. She stopped going to work, she stopped taking care of herself, she pretty much stopped doing anything that had mattered to her before. No matter what me or my older sisters did, we couldn't get her to take interest in anything. Not until my eldest sister flicked on the E! channel, Keeping Up with the Kardashians happened to be on, and right away, my mom was obsessed. She ended up binge-watching the entire show in her pajamas on the sofa over the next few weeks. After that, it was like we got her mom back. She started washing herself and dressing herself again. She even left the house. I was so happy. Our family seemed like it was whole again, even if losing my dad was something we'd never get over. Not completely. But something more sinister was hiding underneath the surface. I just didn't know it yet. A year later, my mom stopped getting up for work in the morning. I feared the worst and falling back into her depression, but the truth was much harder to bear. One morning, I went inside her room and saw she was sleeping. I shook her and tried to wake her up, but she just groaned and rolled over. It wasn't working. I had to try something else. In the end, I turned on the light and pulled the comforter off of her. I told her that she needed to get up for work and that staying in bed wouldn't do her any good. But Mom told me she didn't have work that morning. I was confused. She was a teacher and school started in an hour. It didn't make any sense. When I asked her about it, the answer completely shook me. Mom said that she'd gotten another job in the evenings instead. I just didn't get it. My mom had been a teacher all my life. She'd never once even hinted that she was unhappy or wanted to change careers. It was super strange. I asked her what she was doing now, and she told me she was entertaining down at a club. I didn't really understand. Nothing seemed to make sense, but I guessed if my mom was happy, then I was happy. Too bad things became 10 times worse. My mom started dressing differently and spending way too much money on designer clothes. I peeked at my mom's credit card bills and noticed she was super deep in debt. I didn't want it to carry on, but I was only 14 and I had no idea where to start. My mom was meant to take care of me and not the other way around. A few weeks later, my mom told me the strangest thing. She came into the kitchen while I was sat at the dinner table doing my homework. She told me she'd be having surgery soon and that my older sisters would be looking after me while she was at the hospital. I was really scared. My dad had already died and I didn't want to lose my mom too. My eyes became wet with tears and I reached out to take her hand. "What's wrong?" I asked her. She laughed and shook her head. "There's nothing wrong with me, silly. It's just a little plastic surgery," she told me with a smile. I couldn't believe it. My mouth dropped open wide and I stared at her like she was crazy. She was already in debt. How was she going to afford plastic surgery? And more importantly, why? I had so many questions and no answers. When I asked her about it, she told me it was for work, but I didn't understand. What kind of work meant you needed to change how you looked? I asked my sisters and they told me to leave it. Mom was happy and that was all that mattered. You might think that things can't get any worse, but oh boy, you'd be wrong. Eventually, I learned that the new job my mom had gotten was as an impersonator. She was working at a club pretending to be Kris Jenner. It was so freaking crazy. It had to be a joke, right? But when I confronted my sisters about it, they confessed that they had been working with my mom all along. They were pretending to be Kim and Khloe Kardashian. I mean, I guessed my family looked somewhat similar to the Kardashians. We had the same tanned skin and dark hair. My sisters and I were also slim but curvy, much like the sisters in that famous family. But impersonating them felt like a step too far. After all, who wanted to spend their whole life pretending to be somebody else? Now that the cat was out of the bag, I tried to get them to see that they could do something better with their time. But they were all convinced that they were happy as they were. It didn't really make sense to me, but I was glad that they were happy and that my mom found something to do with her time instead of grieving. As time went on, however, my mom's debts didn't seem to get any better. The work she did wasn't making enough money for the upkeep she had to do on her appearance. She continued to get Botox and plastic surgery. She was dyeing her hair and buying designer items to match Kris as closely as possible. My sisters weren't much better either. They were all absolutely obsessed with getting likes and followers on Instagram too. I just didn't see the point in any of it. By the time I turned 16, all three of them were still at it. Except now they were getting popular. They started doing more shows, making videos, and even even selling merch. Before I knew it, they all had millions of followers on Instagram. It was awful. And what was worse, they became the laughingstock of my entire town. Everyone at school began calling us the 𝗕𝗔𝗦𝗘𝗦 family. I became the butt of every joke, and people always asked me which one I was meant to be. I hated it. It was impossible to make any friends when I started high school, and the other kids made every day at school a living hell. But did my family care? No, of course they didn't. They were way too caught up in their own happiness to give a damn about me, especially now that they were making crazy amounts of money from it. Instead, I just had to deal with my issues on my own. I spent almost every night crying myself to sleep about how much I hated it. I wish I'd been born into a different family. I wanted to get out somehow, but I just didn't know how. Then things took a turn for the worse. My sisters and my mom started telling me I was old enough to get some surgery too. They said they could do my eyebrows and my makeup and make me look exactly like Kylie Jenner. I was so mad. How did they not understand me? After all this time, they still thought I would go along with their silly games. They kept going on and on, pressuring me into going along with them. I even gave in one time. I was feeling sad and I thought spending time with my sisters would help. I was wrong. They did my makeup and put fake tan all over me. When I finally looked in the mirror, I hated it. I didn't look anything like myself. I didn't understand why they wanted to change me so badly. Wasn't I fine just the way I was? Enough was enough. I put my foot down and I said no. I told them I didn't want anything to do with their stupid shows and I wanted to live my own life. When my mom found out, she wasn't happy. The three of them confronted me. My mom told me that I was being stupid and I wasn't supporting their work. She said that I should do what's best for the family as a whole. She said that if I didn't do what she wanted, she'd just ask my cousin Jenna to come and take my place. My cousin, who had always been jealous of me and wanted to do anything to worm her way into my family. It was the last straw. I was done being the nice one all the time while my family ruined my life. All I could think of was, what about me? When had they ever supported me? When had they ever done what was best for me? I could feel myself getting madder and madder. I stomped my feet on the ground and I screamed at my mom. I said that they had never once treated me with love or thought about how this whole thing affected me. All three of them stared at me like I was insane. Before they could say anything, however, I turned and ran up to my room. Tears filled my eyes and I sobbed and sobbed into my pillow. My life was a joke. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do now. I didn't stand a chance at having a happy, normal life while I lived under the same roof as these Kardashian-obsessed women. That's when I realized the solution to all my problems. If I found a way to leave my home, I could be free of my family and live my own life exactly the way I wanted it. But how was I going to do that? I had no friends I could stay with, and the only other family I had was my uncle and aunt, who were Jenna's parents. I think living with Jenna would have been even worse. So I took a deep breath and I tried to gather my thoughts. How on earth could I get myself out of this mess? Then it hit me. What if I just ran away? I could find a homeless shelter somewhere or even a church that could help me. Anything was better than staying in this house a moment longer. Once I made the decision, I packed up some bags and climbed out of my bedroom window and I ran. It wasn't exactly all sunshine and rainbow, however. For starters, I didn't realize just how cold it was outside. November probably wasn't the best time of year to run away from home, but it was already too late. I traveled to the next town over, but I had no luck finding anywhere to stay there. Then I tried the next town, and the next one, and the next. Eventually, I began to get sick. The rain and cold weather didn't help at all. One night, when the sun had already gone down and there was a storm brewing, I took shelter in a park underneath a bunch of trees. I couldn't sleep because of my cough, and so I stayed awake counting the leaves above me until eventually I passed out. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to doctors fussing all around me. I had a mask over my mouth pumping oxygen, and the lights were bright and harsh. I wanted to ask, where am I? But I couldn't. I felt too weak. Then everything went black. The next time I woke up, I saw a familiar face. It was my mom, and she looked awful. Her mascara was ruined by tears, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. I reached out and touched her hand. Her whole face lit up, and she smiled over at me. She told me she was so happy to see me awake and that she had thought she might never see me again. I smiled at her. I couldn't talk still. I was so weak. She told me that she was sorry. She knew she had let her obsession with the Kardashians go too far. She confessed that it was her way to cope after my dad passed away. She said that if she was pretending to be someone else, she didn't have to deal with the reality of living without him. Besides, trying to be exactly like Kris Jenner had given her motivation and a reason to go on. She shook her head and wiped tears from her eyes. But I should have been motivated by you. My children should have been my reason to go on. Instead, I've completely neglected you. How can you ever forgive me? She said. She began wailing then. She wept and laid herself over my body as she cried, hugging me tightly. I stroked her hair and held her close, and I smiled because I knew that things would change after that, and they did. My mom and I began spending every evening together. We ate dinner together, watched soap operas, and my mom even let me get a dog. I picked a cute Labrador puppy. My mom joked and said that we should call her Kim. I've never glared at someone so hard before. And I totally didn't call her Kim or Chloe or Kendall. I called her Hope. And that's exactly what she's been for me. People still picked on me at school about my family, however, so I transferred and I got a fresh new start. My life went back to being good again instead of a nightmare. And even though I look back and cringe over all those years we wasted, it feels good to have my mom back again as herself.